Despite growing international pressure, North Korea is still refusing to back down, telling the United Nations that negotiations are off the table, at the current time at least. Pyongyang's deputy ambassador to the UN, Kim In-yong, told the UN Assembly on Monday that it would not discuss laying down its nuclear arms as long as the US maintains its, quote, hostile policy against the regime. Kim warned the situation on the Korean peninsula was touch and go and that a nuclear war could break out at any moment. North Korea says it won't engage in diplomacy with Washington until it has achieved its goal of developing a long-range missile capable of reaching the eastern coast of the United States.
A new round of combined military drills is carried out by Seoul and Washington, designed to hone interoperability and communication by the two forces. This one comes on the backdrop of the possibility of further provocations from up north. Yoon Shin starts us off with a 10-day joint exercise.
Another round of joint military drills by South Korea and the U.S. kicked off Monday in the waters both east and west of the peninsula. As many as 40 naval vessels from the two allies are involved in the exercises, including the nuclear-powered aircraft carrier USS Ronald Reagan, which holds up to 70 aircraft from fighter jets to helicopters, and the 18,000-ton submarine USS Michigan, packed with some 150 Tomahawk cruise missiles. South Korean attack helicopters, defense units, and warships such as the Sejong the Great Aegis-armed destroyer have also been deployed for the training exercise. In addition, the U.S. is using the Joint Surveillance Target Attack Radar system during the drills, monitoring North Korea's ground and naval movements up close. The U.S. Navy described the purpose of the operation as to check the allies' communications, interoperability, and partnership. However, there are concerns that Pyongyang may protest against the military exercise with additional provocations, as joint drills like these have antagonized the North in the past. The military remains on alert, as officials from Seoul also raised the possibility of another missile launch from North Korea around the date of China's 19th National Congress of the Communist Party on October 18th. Pyongyang's latest threats included a nuclear test and a ballistic missile launch only a month ago.
We are going to see what happens with North Korea. I will say, look.
President Donald Trump's pessimism on the prospect of finding any diplomatic solution to the North Korean nuclear threat may be just a negotiating tactic.
We're going to see what happens with North Korea. That's all I can say. We're going to see what happens. We're totally prepared for numerous things. We are going to see what happens with North Korea. I will say, look, if something can happen where we negotiate, I'm always open to that. But if it's going to be something other than negotiation, believe me, we are ready, more so than we have ever been.
But it could also be laying the groundwork for the eventual use of military force to stop North Korea from developing a nuclear-armed intercontinental ballistic missile.
This administration, not just Trump, the administration...
Well, while talks continue, the U.S. is practicing precaution, running drills this week to remove non-military Americans out of the Korean peninsula. So who will flinch first? Let me ask Gordon Chang, columnist at the Daily Beast and author of Nuclear Showdown. Gordon, welcome back.
Thanks, Kennedy.
So you think that war is an extreme form of diplomacy, where others traditionally feel it's sort of the opposite of diplomacy?
Well, they say politics is war by any means, or the other way around. You know, this is, it's just a form on a continuum. And clearly we've got coercive diplomacy right now. It could bleed into actual fighting. I don't think that it will for quite some time. But nonetheless, the United States needs to be very concerned. And actually, we are preparing for war right now because, as you mentioned, we're practicing the evacuation of American citizens. We're also doing something even more extraordinary. military, and that is we're looking at a Taiwanese ship because we want to know if it would serve as a good hospital vessel for us. That is just something unprecedented, and that means that the Pentagon really is thinking about going to war and what we'd have to do to protect Americans.
Yeah, and considering the casualty rate and what kind of ships would be able to offer immediate surgical assistance, and that was the inspection of that ship. So I hear there's a decapitation team, this special forces unit that is running some of the joint drills with the South Korean military. What does that say to you? And is that a literal decapitation team? What does that mean, that phrase?
Well, it means that they're trying to go after the leadership of North Korea, which really means Kim Jong-un. And of course, all militaries practice this. What is different here is that we're actually talking about it in public, because normally that's not done. And really what they're trying to do, of course, is scare and intimidate Kim Jong-un. I'm not so sure that it really does. I mean, it'd be very difficult to get at him unless we were doing it with a missile.
Yeah.
But actually putting people on the ground to try and find him, that's probably not going to happen.
Yeah, it seems, well, who knows? I don't know that anything is out of the realm of possibility. Sure. And, we've, especially after the Osama bin Laden raid, special forces are quite imaginative, and they spend a lot of time strategizing and preparing. So that wouldn't surprise me. What I do think is interesting is a lot of the language that's directed at North Korea is really directed at China. And there are those who say that Secretary of State Tillerson and President Trump's combative rhetoric is actually just good cop, bad cop. My question for you is, which one is better at sending a direct message to China? Which one's more effective?
Yeah, I don't think this is a good cop, bad cop routine on the part of President Trump and Tillerson. I think this is just the president not enforcing message discipline, and Tillerson having very different ideas how this should proceed. When it comes to China, I think the most important thing is that it's the economic pressure that we're applying on them, not the insults, not the threats. Not now, but it will be. I mean, President Trump's September 21 executive order really would cut off all dealings with Chinese businesses and banks that deal with the North Koreans, may even cut off business with China itself. This really is strict. This actually does have the potential of disarming North Korea peacefully by going at China, its main sponsor. But the administration has got to be very clear that it's got to have the political will to actually enforce this. And right now in the Treasury Department, they don't have the sanctions people right there to enforce the rules prior to September 21. These September 21 rules just increase their workload exponentially. They're just not there.
Yeah, and there aren't enough people to cover it.
Certainly not.
All right, so, this is very interesting because we have seen North Korea, when the United States and South Korea have run their joint military operations, that's when we tend to see missile launches.
Provocations.
Yeah. What are you expecting now?
I'm not expecting it now. I mean, I'll put myself out on a limb because I'll probably be wrong. But right now what we're going to be is China's 19th National Communist Party Congress. It starts on Wednesday, goes for about a week. And then after that, they have the first plenum, which is the really big deal. So that's about 7 days, maybe 8 days. And this is the most sensitive time in the Chinese political calendar. And if the North Koreans do something really provocative, it means the Chinese have lost day-to-day control of the North Koreans. But if the North Koreans are quiet through this National Congress and first plenum, it really means that the Chinese are controlling things, because the North Koreans have gotten the message from Beijing, don't do anything belligerent. Yeah. So we're going to wait, and we're going to see a lot about this relationship between Beijing and Pyongyang in the next week.
Yeah, we'll see if North Korea is terrified that China is going to yank the leash yet again. Yes. And choke them out. Who's to say? That's a very interesting timeline you've laid out. So we'll watch for the next 8 days and see if we hear a peep out of North Korea.
Is systematically preparing for a time not that far off in the future. It's basically next year, the way I interpret it in context, when diplomacy has failed.
A recent poll shows increasing U.S. support among Trump's Republican supporters for a preemptive strike to take out North Korean nuclear or ballistic missile sites, but a strong majority of Americans still oppose such a move. While launching such a strike to prevent an imminent North Korean attack on the U.S. would be a justifiable use of force, it might be difficult to prove. Any first strike military options, including possible cyber attacks to sabotage North Korean missile tests, or a decapitation strike to kill Kim Jong-un and the leadership in Pyongyang would risk deadly retaliation against South Korea and the 28,000 American troops stationed in the South and could plunge the entire region into a nuclear war.
The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime. The United States is ready, willing, and able, but hopefully this will not be necessary.
Where will our current policy, if nothing changes, where will our current policy with the North lead us?
I think, Brian, inescapably, we're sliding toward war. I think part of the problem is going to be the North Koreans over the last 50 years have learned they can provoke, talk, gain compensation, and provoke again. So I anticipate at some point Kim Jong-un, young, untested, probably rational. By the way, rational governments do stupid things all the time. The Japanese attacking the United States, Kennedy and Johnson getting us into Vietnam. So, I think a provocation from the North Koreans in the coming year is very likely to result in us striking them in a major way with conventional air and sea power to destroy the nuclear capability, which, by the way, will mostly work. But then we could anticipate high-intensity warfare in the Korean Peninsula, which would be a disaster for the region.
A key date on North Korea's calendar came and went on Tuesday with no military provocations from the regime. And watchers had predicted a possible missile launch, but it never materialized. With that said, watchers warn that the regime may conduct missile tests in the coming days and weeks. Kim Hyo-sun with the story.
North Korea celebrated the 72nd anniversary of the founding of its ruling Workers' Party on Tuesday with singing and dancing.
When I make eye contact with the audience, they smile back at me. It makes me happy and there's great ambience.
Contrary to what many had anticipated, the regime did not conduct any provocations, with the state media broadcasting performances and the usual propaganda. With a massive personnel reshuffle within the party over the weekend, experts say leader Kim Jong-un could be focusing on consolidating his power base. They say Pyongyang could have decided to remain quiet, especially when all eyes are on the regime's next move. Some also say the North could be calculating the timing for its next provocation as U.S. President Donald Trump continues to ramp up his harsh rhetoric against the regime.
As North Korea's provocations are followed by a significant aftermath, which is sometimes difficult for the regime to handle, it's likely Pyongyang is still weighing its options.
Yet tensions on the Korean Peninsula remain elevated as the regime may carry out provocations on October 18th when China begins its 19th Party Congress, or sometime in mid-October when the U.S. is expected to send an aircraft carrier to waters near the peninsula for a combined exercise with the South Korean Navy.
Russian state news agency quoted North Korea's foreign minister as saying on Wednesday that President Donald Trump has lit the wick of the war against North Korea. The statement follows weeks of tension between North Korea and the United States, initially sparked by Pyongyang's nuclear testing. North Korea's foreign minister Ri Yong-ho said to Russia's TASS, by his bellicose and insane statement in the UN arena, Trump, it can be said, lit the wick of the war against us. We need to settle the final score, only with a hail of fire, not words. When asked by a TASS reporter if a dialogue between North Korea and the U.S. is possible, Ri said it is not.
The North Korea threat in focus on Capitol Hill this morning. In just a few hours, President Trump will meet with the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, and the Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, amid concerns that North Korea is preparing for another missile test. experts say that the Kim Jong-un regime is readying to launch a launch to coincide with today's anniversary of the nation's founding party. Now, yesterday, Secretary Mattis told the Army to stand ready in case diplomacy fails.
It is right now a diplomatically led, economic sanction buttressed effort to try to turn North Korea off this path. Now, what does the future hold? Neither you nor I can say. So there's one thing the U.S. Army can do, and that is you have got to be ready to ensure